Okay.
I like that noise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, ready?
Yes, very much so.
1, 2, 3. Do you have any friends who are twins, Mark?
Let me see. Not now, currently in my adult life.
Okay.
However, there was a set of twins, identical twins, in the year group above me in school.
Did you know them at all?
Would you? Yeah, vaguely. Would you care to guess what nickname they both went by?
I don't know what.
Twinny.
No, stop.
I'm fucking telling you.
Wow. Okay. Not a lot of creativity in your school, huh?
Twinny. Yeah.
I guess that's one way to avoid having to learn which one is which.
That's amazing. Twinny.
If you give them two nicknames, you have the same problem. You still don't know which one you're talking to. So Twinny. That works. My college roommates were twins.
Okay.
Identical twins, Monica and Michelle. And then when I graduated from college, I actually lived with one half of another set of twins, a gal named Katie, and her name's Karen. We all went to school together.
Sorry, say that again. I just did exactly.
Oh my God, you did the clapper monkey, didn't you?
Grayed out completely. So you knew a set of twins.
My roommates when I was in college were identical twins, Monica and Michelle.
Wow, and you lived with them both?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, right.
Yeah.
I'm in.
And then when I graduated from college, I roomed with half of another set of twins. So I roomed with a gal named Katie, and she had a twin sister named Karen, but Karen did not live with us. So twice I have roomed with twins. Well, for years. The Monica and Michelle I lived with for a very long time, and Katie for only a year. But when Karen and Katie came to university, they were like, all right, we're done with this twinning thing from the outset. And they decided like they didn't want to room together or anything like that. They kept their own circles of friends insofar as you can do that at a school that only has like 1,600 people in it. So we all knew each other. But Monica and Michelle, on the other hand, were more of that like classical type of twin that you think of. They lived together, obviously. They shared friend groups. They often did things like in sync with each other and said things in unison. Their personalities, right. Their personalities are wildly different if you actually get to know them. But
and were they physically identical? Were they like indistinguishable?
I mean, supposedly. I've known them for so long that it's very obvious which one is which to me. But if you didn't know them, you might be like, oh, they look exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Like I couldn't pick out to you exactly what it is about each one of them that is so distinctly different to me.
Yep.
But yeah, they are, for all intents and purposes, they are identical twins. If you didn't know them, you probably couldn't tell them apart.
Amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, they always shared what we liked to call twin vibes back in the day. Interestingly, Monica and Michelle, the ones who are the inseparable twins, they now live on opposite sides of the world. So Michelle lives in Colorado and Monica is in Korea.
Okay.
Karen and Katie, on the other hand, live near each other in Portland, Oregon. They got married around the same time and both have 2 daughters with their respective husbands. And both of these sets of twins also have one older sister, by the way, just an interesting little coincidence.
Very, very much so.
Yeah. So I bring this up because I think most of us are pretty fascinated by twins. Right?
Completely.
Yeah. The idea that there are people walking around sharing DNA seems like the stuff of sci-fi. And we're always trying to figure out what that means for them as people and for us generally. Do they act and think alike because of the way they were raised, or is it because there's something inherent in that shared DNA that makes them inextricably linked?
In my reading about the Jim twins last week, I didn't go into any kind of detail in reading about it, but I'm reasonably sure that there were Nazi experiments on twins when they came across. We're going to talk about that. There we go. When they came across groups of twins in their purges, they would use one as a control subject.
Yes, we are going to go into that a little bit here. So, but before we get there, for the record, many twins even claim to have like a form of ESP, to be able to tell what the other is thinking or even feel what they're feeling when they're not together. Some claim that one has gotten injured or died and the other felt the pain of the injury or knew right away that their twin was gone, even though they weren't physically together. And there's really no good way of knowing as of now exactly what degree of nature versus nurture makes multiples who they are. But there are a lot of really fucking bad ways. Obviously, when we think of heinous and unethical twin studies, the first thing anyone's going to think of is Joseph Mengele, Auschwitz's so-called angel of death, and one of the most vile human beings ever to walk this earth. Like, I don't generally use the word evil because obviously that's like a religious concept and more or less meaningless. But if you
We've spoken about this before, it's reductive.
Yeah, exactly. But if you can use the word evil for anyone, it's Joseph fucking Mengele. Conscienceless, gleefully sadistic, completely without regard for human life. One of history's just true monsters. And he was obsessed with twins. Before coming to Auschwitz in 1943, he worked at the Institute for Heredity, Biology, and Racial Hygiene in Frankfurt. Yeah, like what a horrible name, right? Everything about it says like eugenics and whatnot.
Institute for Racial Hygiene.
Racial hygiene, heredity, biology, and racial hygiene. Yeah. Love cleansing out those racial identities,
impurities. Yeah.
And he worked as an assistant to a famous researcher there who was studying twins, and it was cool and all, but institutions like that, as eugenicsy and gross as it is, have ethical standards.
Yes.
Auschwitz didn't, which meant that not only could he walk through the lines of people coming in off the trains to the camp and pick out twins to study by hand, there were also no repercussions if they died in his experiments. So for a soulless creep like Mengele, this is the perfect situation. Honestly, if you were a twin, you actually had at least a little more of a chance to survive the camps than other populations, as Mengele was intrigued by them and not intentionally trying to slaughter them. Yeah. He just didn't give a fuck if he did. The BBC took let's try that again. The BBC took recollections from some of the survivors of those twin studies who described grim proceedings. Quote, Yona Locks says Mengele removed organs from people without anesthetic, and if one twin died, the other would be murdered. Vera Kriegel says that he killed people with an injection to the heart and then dissected them. She remembers being ushered into his laboratory. I was looking at a whole wall of human eyes, a wall of blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes. These eyes, they were staring at me like a collection of butterflies, and I fell down on the floor. The first experiment she was subjected to involved being kept in a small wooden cage with her sister and being given painful injections in her back. She doesn't know why, but thinks it may have been an attempt to change the color of her eyes. In another experiment, she says the pair of them and more than 100 other twins were given injections of bacteria that cause Noma disease, an infection of the mouth or genitals, which causes boils and often turns gangrenous. Terrible stuff. And just sort of tip of the iceberg here. Last podcast on the left did a whole series on Mengele, which as usual, I recommend. It's a real deep dive into it. So if you want to know more about all this kind of stuff and not just a little overview, that's a good place to find it. The only other thing I'll say specifically about Mengele is that even though the motherfucker got away, at least he, like Captain Cook, had a wonderfully awful death. While on holiday in Brazil, he suffered a stroke in the water and he drowned. A beautiful twofer, and I hope it was excruciating. It's absolute terrible, terrible person. Anyway, that we most closely associate experimentation on multiples with one of the worst fucking Nazis and a crop that set the bar high already makes it bizarre that less than 20 years after World War II, a wildly unethical twin experiment was carried out by a Jewish researcher with the help of a Jewish orphanage. A thing that, had it been common knowledge, would probably really piss off pretty much every Jew who heard about it.
So 20 years after the end of World War II?
Yeah, like about 15, 20 years after World War II. Twin experiments carried out here in America.
Which takes it quite close to my lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually thinking that. I was like, I mean, it's really not that, it's the 60s, between like 60, 65, that kind of era. So I mentioned last week the documentary Three Identical Strangers, a documentary about triplets Bobby, Eddie, and David, who were separated at birth and then found out by chance in 1980 at the age of 19 that each other existed. The three became a media sensation, doing television interviews together where people marveled at their similarities and their personalities and their mannerisms. And the three of them became close and eventually even opened a restaurant together. So, seems like a very nice little story of these people who were separated at birth for whatever reason and were reunited. But after a while, things became strained. And along with all the cute little quirks they shared in common, it was discovered that the three also struggled with mental illness. One of them ended up taking his own life, a tragic end to what had seemed such a joyful reunion. And that wasn't the only thing about that situation that turned out to be really dark. The triplets had been adopted out of an agency in New York called Louise Wise Adoption Services. And the agency had been contacted by a psychologist working under the auspices of the nonprofit Jewish Board of Guardians named Peter Neubauer, who was interested in nature versus nurture studies involving multiples. It's a pretty common thing. A lot of people are interested in that.
Yep.
Now, there are differing opinions on why the triplets and other multiples at the orphanage were separated from one another. The psychiatrist Leon Hoffman and linguist Lois Oppenheim claimed that this was actually fairly standard practice and aligned with what child psychologists thought was wisdom at the time. If you separated multiples and adopted them out into different homes, it would give them a better chance of thriving. They wouldn't have to compete for resources and affection and would be able to develop their own identities. This is what Dr. Viola W. Bernard, who created the study with Neubauer, claimed. But Cal State Fullerton professor Nancy Siegel, who has written several books on twins, including one on this study, says she's read through the literature of the time and can't find any studies that back up that perspective. Further, other agencies that Bernard and Neubauer approached were horrified at the idea of the study and refused to be a part of it. And Siegel says her interview with an adoption specialist who practiced in the 1960s said it was absolutely the goal to keep multiples together. So the idea that this was totally standard practice wasn't really backed up.
Bullshit, yeah.
Yeah. For their part, the Louise Wise Agency, which is now defunct as of 2004, claimed that it was simply too hard to place multiples in homes. People didn't want to have multiple children. They just wanted to adopt one. But this is also undermined by the fact that all of the children were put in homes that already had at least one child, as the researchers did not want them to be raised as only children. Mm-hmm. Others, especially those harmed by what Neubauer and the agency did, claim foul play from the start. Because whatever their reasons for separating the twins and triplets that came through the doors, they did it knowing that they were going to be studied long-term without their or their family's consent. And the homes they were placed in seemed very deliberately chosen to maximize the benefits of the study, specifically in terms of economic class. So particularly with those triplets, this was kind of across the board what they did, but with those triplets, they placed one in an affluent family, one in a middle-class family, and one in a poor family. Just distinctly chose them so that they would be able to look at class and say, okay, we've taken that variable out. Now
it's horrible. It's
horrible.
Pulling strings. It's human puppeteering, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. To take these three kids and put them in these different, classes so that one of them's going to have like this great social privileged life. One of them is going to be
engineering. It's fucking horrible.
Yeah, it's really, really terrible. And that was largely what they did. And those triplets are particularly an extreme case because they had three, so they could do all three of those ranges. But they generally did sort of like a working class for one twin and a, better off family for the other. As the brothers and an estimated 11 other sets of multiples like them grew up, they were visited periodically until the age of 12 by people claiming to be from the adoption agency, who were just checking up to make sure they were adjusting and being treated well and all kinds of nice things one would hope for a child who's been adopted. They gave them Rorschach tests, they tested their IQs, they tested their physical fitness, and so on, hoping to find out whether their shared DNA or their upbringing had the stronger influence on who they'd become. Neither the children nor the adoptive parents were told of the study or that the children were twins. So even the adoptive shady, parents, they had no clue that they had adopted one of a pair of multiples.
Legally, how is this allowed to occur?
It's the 60s, and things have changed a whole lot since then, in large part because of things like that. The ethics have changed. And it's worth noting that the triplets weren't the only ones whose happy reunion turned sour. Several of the sets of twins who now speak about what happened to them report having a really fucking hard time getting along with their sibling once they were reunited. One twin from right down the street in Wayne, New Jersey, reported that her relationship with her twin crumbled within weeks as a result of jealousy over their different upbringings.
Sad.
Wayne is a nice middle-class town, and she'd grown up fairly affluent and privileged. The other twin had grown up in a working-class family in the Bronx. And that rift led to trust issues. And after the Bronx twins secretly contacted their birth mother instead of following a plan they'd set up together, it just became too much. The Jersey twin described it as feeling like she lost her twice. On top of this, at least 3 of the twins from the study took their own lives, which is a pretty high amount in a sampling of, 22 people or whatever, that 3 of them would take their lives. That's seems overrepresented.
Disproportionate, yeah.
Very disproportionate. So Dr. Siegel, the Fullerton professor, talked to 7 sets of twins who'd been a part of the study, and overwhelmingly, they reported feeling hurt, angry, and like they deeply missed out on an important bond their whole lives because of a study that didn't take their well-being into consideration. And what's worse, the records from that study are sealed at Yale until 2065. Again, defenders will say this wasn't a malicious thing, and it's a standard practice to seal off these kinds of records, especially when they pertain to adoption. However, the twins aren't buying it. They think basically this is, to keep the
cover it up, brush it under the fucking brush.
But
look,
they'll all be dead. They can't get legal settlements at that point, right?
Surely, it isn't just your relationship with your immediate family, with your siblings that's going to destroy. Imagine what that does to your fucking worldview. Yeah. If you realize, late into childhood or that you've been the subject of some fucking clandestine study your entire life.
Right.
That's going to fuck you right up.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh my God, those people visiting me, they were doctors. They were watching me. They were fucking studying me all my life, and I didn't even fucking know. That is repulsive, repugnant.
It feels like something out of a movie, It's something out of completely. Conspiracy theory. That idea of strangers coming into your strangers coming into your house, claiming to be doing one thing when really they are taking private information for you from you that they're using to study you, and at the same time,
they do the same to an identical twin that I had no idea I had. Wild.
Just plucking them, from the orphanage, taking them out and then socially engineering them, like you said, is an incredibly wild thing to imagine and try to come to terms with, I'm sure, for these twins. So yeah, there's so much that's just so heavily gross about this.
Even because, like you said, right at the top there, everyone finds twins a little bit fascinating, don't they? Right. Everyone finds twins a little bit interesting. And even that in itself is, obviously I can't speak to that experience because I don't share it. But surely even that has to put some kind of burden on you.
Right.
Your entire fucking life, that everyone finds you a little bit kind of, scratch my head. Look, there's a twin. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Am I really? Is it interesting? Can you fuck off?
Yeah, and that's the thing is some twins take to that, some love it. They love having that shared identity, and some don't. Like Monica and Michelle, they live very separate lives now, but they would go to Halloween parties and things like that as Tweedledee and Tweedledum. They would really sort of lean into being twins. They loved being twins, as opposed to Karen and Katie, who, as soon as they graduated from high school, they were like, we want distinct identities. We do not want people to think of us as Karen and Katie. We want to be individual people, So yeah, I think you're right. It's got to be difficult. You don't choose to be a twin.
Of course.
And that people get fixated on it. It has to be very weird. You must constantly feel like you're being watched, But in this case, the twins who were a part of this study, who have, who now know that they are part of this study and everything, sued for access to at least some of their own records. But the process of actually obtaining them is super difficult, and it still doesn't provide a full picture. Some 10,000 pages of the study have been released, but those pages are heavily redacted. So a lot of the information that they want and need is not there. And the subjects of the study have yet to receive an apology or financial compensation from the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services.
Of them. No one has received a fucking penny.
Not a single penny for what this did. And we're talking about people who their siblings have died. They have gone through
60 odd years ago. Yeah.
Terrible things that happened as a result of this. So as Dr. Siegel puts it, what we can learn from the Neubauer twin experiments is exactly what you were saying with is this legal? It's how not to conduct research. Like, yeah, we're all fascinated by twins and what they can tell us about our own psychology, but it's never worth subjecting unknowing human beings to experimentation that could drastically alter their lives. I mean, they didn't know what this was going to do. That's why it was an experiment. It could have been that, like, oh, these twins are hugely wrapped up in each other, and if you take them away like that, one dies. Like, they don't know. For all they know, that could have been how it worked. So now people still study twins in universities all over the world. But now they
voluntarily
tell them. Nobody is just pulled out of their homes and subjected to this kind of stuff. Got a lot of thoughts there.
Yeah, I do. I found that quite affecting.
Yeah, there's just something about, like, when I was writing it out, it was like, there's nothing in this story that is, you know, a blatant thing like, oh, nobody gets operated on and their, you know, guts pulled out or anything like that. And yet it still hits so hard at just things that we understand about ourselves and our identities and our families and our, you know, I don't know, just sense of autonomy and everything. Just everything about it really hits.
That's that you've hit the nail on the head there. That autonomy, that agency, that need to be at least a fucking active participant in the decisions that guide your life.
Yeah, that's why something like Truman Show or whatever, like, hits us, you know, that there's a part of you that always wonders how much control you have over your life, and if it's someone pulling some unseen string or things like that, and to find out that actually has happened in your life.
Horrible.
Fucking hell.